Welcome to the debate. Our discussion today centers on the human hand, not simply as, a biological tool, but as one of the most ancient and frankly potent instruments in magical and spiritual traditions. We're going to be exploring its complex symbolism, touching on concepts like formalized hand positions, mudras, the arcane discipline of ritual gesture, chironomia, and also protective symbols like the hamsa.
Right, and the hand's role as a focus for magic, well, it's undeniable, isn't it? It's such a central, effective instrument in, everything from healing practices right through to martial arts traditions.
Absolutely. So the core question that emerges from the material we're looking at is quite profound. Does the immense power that's attributed to the hand in these traditions, does it stem primarily from its, let's say, inherent ancient spiritual symbolism, where it functions as a kind of universal channel of transformation, maybe a portal to external planes? Or is its effectiveness actually derived more fundamentally from internal psychological conditioning, perhaps learned repetition, and the neurological reinforcement of conscious intention? So I'll be making the case for the hand as an inherently powerful spiritual portal, one rooted in deep symbolic meaning.
And I'll be arguing that its function, while potent, is best explained through the lens of intention, practice, and the body's own quite sophisticated neurological mechanisms.
Okay, so my position really holds that the hand is intrinsically a sacred instrument. It's capable of communicating directly with spiritual planes and invoking specific, often invisible, forces. And this power isn't just sort of projected outwards randomly. It's tied to inherited ancient symbols that function as well-established channels. You just need to consider the depth of knowledge encapsulated in traditional ritual hand movements, like chironomia. That's the systematic study of these ritual gestures. This body of knowledge involves really complex combinations used very specifically to connect the practitioner to, say, the elements or celestial bodies, even deities. Now, that clearly indicates a reliance on external spiritual forces, functioning far beyond just the internal desire or intention of the practitioner. We're talking about plugging into a defined outside power structure. And even the simpler protective symbols like the mano cornuta, the horned hand, or the mano figa, the fig hand, they're used for specific aims, like protection or fortune, precisely because they carry this inherited, universally understood symbolic weight.
Okay. I do acknowledge the sheer historical weight of these symbols, absolutely. But I would argue that the magical function of the hand is actually best explained by its capacity to generate quite specific internal and sometimes external responses, primarily through psychological and neurological means. The effectiveness, I think, is generated and conditioned, perhaps more than it's simply inherited. Gestures achieve their power, you see, precisely because they generate specific neural pathways. They reliably link certain thoughts, intents, feelings with corresponding movements. And this essentially creates a kind of reliable mental or emotional trigger. We can see clear evidence for these psychological mechanisms at work. For instance, the material describes the shield gesture, the gesto escudo, as being effective because it activates a defense response right in the limbic system, our sort of primal emotional control center.
And interestingly, it's intuitively read and mirrored by observers through their mirror neurons. Now, this suggests the hand's power is fundamentally biocommunicative. It's harnessing our innate capacity to signal and react. And crucially, the key to success in so many traditions is conscious repetition. This repetition consolidates a gesture into a deep internal energetic seal. And that implies the power is fixed by the mind through dedicated practice, not solely by inherited spiritual tradition. So let's tackle this point directly, this idea of repetition versus inheritance. If the hand's power were purely, as you say, a portal to external spiritual forces, then why is conscious, often quite arduous, repetition so frequently required to consolidate the magical gesture? The source material is very clear on this. Repetitive practice prepares the brain to act magically with greater fluidity. That points directly, I think, toward an internal mechanism, one of learning and neurological efficiency. The symbol might be ancient, yes, but the effective use of that symbol seems to be fundamentally a skill honed within the practitioner's own nervous system. The intention has to be fixed and reinforced internally.
Right. I see why you emphasize the mechanism of learning, but I might frame it differently. I'd argue that repetition serves more a function of attunement, perhaps, or even purification. It's preparing the vessel, the body, to properly receive and channel these external forces, not actually creating the power itself from scratch. And frankly, I'm not convinced that neurological reinforcement alone accounts for the most extreme, the most specific examples of power that seem contained within physical components. Let's consider those darker traditions detailed in our material, like the mano de gloria. This is a desiccated relic, the actual hand of an executed criminal, often used with a candle made from the fat of that same criminal. These are highly specific metaphysical properties and intensely ritualized components. They're deemed essential for generating very specific effects, like paralysis or opening locks. Acquired dark symbolic properties. It feels like the object itself contains the power, making it the portal, the conduit of a specific dark energy, regardless of how often the practitioner simply practices holding it.
That is a compelling and, yes, chilling example regarding the ritual demands. But we have to look at the whole structure of the belief system around it. Even the dark symbolism of the mano de gloria, it relies entirely on a shared, quite rigid framework. The material itself mentions that the power of this relic only ceases when very specific counterspells are applied, things like unguents made of owl blood or certain animal fats. This demonstrates a highly codified system of action and counteraction, doesn't it? The artifact's power is defined by the system. It works because the intention, and indeed the counter-intention, are universally understood within that specific magical framework. So arguably, this is still a form of complex, highly specific psychological programming, albeit a very dark one.
The relic acts as an incredibly powerful focus, I grant you that, but its efficacy seems maintained by adherence to the established magical rules that essentially program the mind to expect a certain outcome, and maybe program observers to react appropriately to the ritual's conclusion.
Yet, we can't just ignore the inherent structure that the source material attributes to the hand itself. Let's maybe shift focus slightly to the functional differentiation we see between the left and right hands. This duality, the left hand typically seen as receptive, associated with feminine energy, intuition, versus the right hand being active, the transmitting hand associated with action, power, conscious clarity. This really points to an inherent energetic structure within the human body, one that probably predates any later psychological codification. Rituals consistently require using one hand to say, receive or gather energies, and the other to project or discharge them. This doesn't feel like arbitrary social learning. It seems to reflect a fundamental spiritual balance, perhaps mirroring a cosmic duality, and highlighting the innate capacity of the body to function as an energy transformer.
Okay, I approach the utility of the two hands from a slightly different angle. While the assignment of these specific roles, left, right, is undoubtedly ancient, their practical utility can also be understood through the body's fundamental biological and especially defensive reactions, which are then perhaps formalized into ritual language. Think about the instinctual, often asymmetrical way we defend ourselves or gesture emphatically. An open, dominant palm naturally directs attention. It actively projects immediate purpose or warning. The shield gesture, as we talked about, seems rooted in the instinctual activation of the limbic system to signal danger or defense. So the power of the hand in ritual could be derived from its core biological capacity to signal clear intention, which is then codified into spiritual language. The spiritual framing, left for receiving, right for action, might be a kind of universal overlay applied to an already existing, highly effective physical reaction pattern that dictates a dualistic function in how we signal and interact with the world around us. The neurological utility, in this view, might actually precede the spiritual explanation.
But if utility was the primary driver, why would traditions like chiromancy be so widespread and frankly, so persistent?
Chiromancy treats the hand not just as a tool, but as a living map of the soul. It's seen as revealing what's often termed inherited spiritual destiny or karma. The lines of life, heart, fate, they're viewed as fundamental paths, revealing core life energy, our emotional logic. This strongly suggests a predetermined underlying spiritual structure that guides our course, reflecting this ongoing dialogue between, as the material puts it, what we are and what we are becoming. If the hand were merely a neutral mechanism for projecting intention, why would its lines supposedly reflect inherited fate and destiny, rather than just, say, current health or repetitive physical habits? The map itself seems to hold a pre-existing narrative.
Well, I fully accept that the lines themselves are said to change over time, mirroring our decisions, our emotional wounds, transformations, growth. That's the hand reflecting the mind's journey, absolutely. However, the very intentional act of fixing a magical symbol onto the skin, I'm thinking of a tattoo here, that argues quite strongly, I believe, for the supremacy of constructed intent over any purely inherited structure. A symbolic design, when tattooed onto the body, becomes a permanent ritual seal. It's described as an extension of the individual's own magic. It actively reinforces intention every single day. The material calls it a silent talisman that acts as a permanent interface, residing deep within our corporal and psychological memory, and crucially, saving the practitioner the mental effort of constant conscious evocation. This permanence and the deliberate act of marking the body arguably amplifies the magical function far beyond what inherited lines or even temporary, conscious gestures might achieve. The tattoo fixes the magical will permanently in a way an inherited line, by its nature, cannot.
That's a compelling point about the power of permanence, certainly. Though I might frame its role a bit differently. The variability of the lines on the palm, let's take the line of life, for example, to fragment or clarify based on life's transformative experiences, that shows the hand is constantly acting as a kind of spiritual barometer. It's a living reflection of the soul's deepest lessons and ongoing challenges. The tattoo, while yes, a powerful and permanent focus point, could be seen as merely the inscription that's placed upon that existing dynamic map. It channels and amplifies the soul's will, certainly, but it's the framework of the soul itself, reflected in the palm's inherited blueprint, that holds the fundamental underlying potential and power. It's, if you like, the canvas that makes the paint visible and meaningful.
Ultimately, I think our material demonstrates pretty clearly that the hand functions as an extraordinarily effective mechanism for magic, largely because it excels at reinforcing conscious intention. It helps generate those specific neurological and psychological triggers that solidify goals and make the implementation of magic highly efficient. The conscious gestures, the focused repetition, and perhaps especially the permanent symbols like tattoos, they act as powerful circuits, facilitating the desired effect often with significantly less conscious effort over time. The power becomes internalized, made manifest through, essentially, biological processes.
And yet we really cannot neglect the deep foundation of spiritual and symbolic significance upon which this entire function seems to rest. The hands, well, throughout recorded history, they've been understood as ancient channels of vital energy, capable of connecting practitioners directly to elements, to deities, to powerful external metaphysical forces. The existence of physical relics carrying specific power and the traditions of inherited destiny reflected in the palm show the hand remains a potent portal, reflecting both, perhaps, an inherited spiritual design and our active, ongoing transformation.
Right. The material really does place the hand squarely at this fascinating intersection of psychology, tradition, and powerful symbolic intent. It suggests that, really, to fully understand its magical capacity, we have to appreciate both the ancient formalized symbolism and the immediate, effective way those intentions are solidified and made manifest through the body's own internal processing and its immense neurological capacity. There's clearly a complex interplay at work here.